Hare Krishna, everybody. Yesterday, the United States switched sides. We were formerly on the side of the allies of NATO, who had been protecting us, and we have been protecting them for the last 76 years. But now, for the first time, we're on the side of the enemies, like North Korea and Russia and those kind of countries, because that's the path that we've taken. So now, Ukraine, and the third anniversary of this war, um, this marks that milestone. And I thought I would read something in honor of that from my favorite historian, the award-winning Yale professor, Timothy Snyder. First of all, though, I'm going to play a video that I produced from a poem that was written by Joan Baez. Um, I saw her in 2005 at a rally in Washington, D.C. with my wife right after Katrina. It was an anti-war rally, and she's awesome. But anyway, I'm going to play this 3-minute video, then read this thing. I don't know if anybody's going to come on, but I need to read this because this is an important thing now, because Ukraine's all on its own, and now it's up to Europe to protect that sovereign nation that was invaded, and practically 1 million people have died in that war. So I'm going to start sharing the screen here, and I'm going to play this video. I hope you enjoy it. Um, Joan Baez wrote this, and it's pretty profound. Mar Mariupol, City of Light by Joan Baez. Here in my comfortable home, with its bright wood and terracotta tiles, tapestry rugs, and soft couches, familiar windowsill niches opening to the edge of glory and roses of heaven, the winds of war came, peevishly, whispering and rattling my solitude with dispatches from distant Ukraine. Quote, "We come from Mariupol," they were murmured. "Who wonders why you've neglected her so soon, why you gasped in horror so briefly, then went on with your life and left her so exposed?" Mariupol was a jewel, teeming with humor and love, courage and industry, cognac and wisdom. Quote, "Then we came raging through her ancient stone streets," whispered the winds of war, "and crushed her white-legged school children into the pavement. We sang through walls, came unasked to dinner tables where the nations had run out. We shattered her every window, demolished her every building, sent death gurgling up in her fountains. Mariupol is an agony," said the winds, "a laughless tale, a sorry thing, an unsolvable horror, a mass funeral. We have been merciless." Yet Mariupol smiles wryly up from the ruins. Quote, "I am a city of light, and the winds of war will not blacken or halt my fierce defiance. I am a city of light, and will only profit from the flares and rockets flashing in the night sky. and the city fires ablaze, and every candle flickering in every darkened shelter. Mariupol exists for now amidst the seeming certainty of total destruction. The wind blows in the marketplace, in the chill breeze, a citizen holding a trembling dog clutches his jacket tight to his throat, closes his eyes, and says to the wind, "Tell the world we are a city of light and are not afraid of being extinguished, only of being forgotten."
So this is from Timothy Snyder's Substack. I would highly recommend uh, subscribing to that because um, my audiobook mentor from Ukraine said that his book on tyranny was excellent. He works for the BBT, and he's a worldwide preacher. Right now, he's undergoing difficulty because his parents live in Ukraine and they don't know what's going to happen next. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going to happen next in this world. So here is his article on the cruelty of this administration. This is from the Thinking About Substack by Timothy Snyder. Quote, recoup the costs, end quote. The sadism of American policy to war-torn Ukraine. The primacy of American foreign policy to Ukraine today is one of grievance. As the American president, vice president, and national security advisor constantly repeat, Ukraine, the victim of a large-scale and criminal Russian invasion, must, quote, recoup the cost, end quote, to the United States taxpayer for aid received under the Biden administration. It is worth patiently considering this proposition. It reveals little about Ukraine, but much about America in February 2025. Number one, the American demand is of an extraordinary scale. In Kyiv and again in Munich, the Americans proposed that Ukraine concede half of the profits from its mineral rights in perpetuity and from other national resources from its ports in perpetuity with a lien on everything important in exchange for essentially nothing. This is not really a monetary proposition, let alone a quote deal, end quote, but rather the demand that Ukraine become an permanent American colony. It amounts to blackmail enabled by ongoing Russian invasion. In effect, the United States is telling Ukraine to concede its resources to the United States under the threat that American aid will be otherwise withdrawn and those resources will be taken by Russia. Number two, Ukraine is currently under attack by the Russian Federation, which invaded its south and southeast in 2014 and then began a full-scale invasion in 2022. For 3 years, Ukraine has resisted the largest offensive in contemporary history. The American demands amount to extremely severe war reparations upon Ukraine, far more severe than was demanded, for example, of Germany after either World War. But this demand is directed against Ukraine, and Ukraine is not the aggressor. Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine is the victim. Until now, the discussion in the United States and elsewhere was the reparations that Russia, as the aggressor state, should pay. That would be the historically normal discussion. It would also be the strategically normal discussion, in that it raises the cost of war to the current aggressor and to future aggressors. Number three, The demand that Ukraine pay a huge sum to the United States is contrary to any logic of ending the war. For the war to come to an end, the aggressor, Russia, must be weakened, and the defender, Ukraine, must be strengthened. If the United States were to demand the heart of Ukraine's economy in the middle of the war, the opposite would be achieved. Ukraine would be weakened and Russia would be strengthened. This escalates and lengthens the current war and makes wider war more likely. Number 4, even if we consider the American demand in terms other than colonialism, reversed war reparations, and or warmongering pro-Russian intervention, even if we regard it on its own terms as a repayment of American aid, this would be contrary to usual practice. When one country chooses to aid another country, it is understood that this has its basis in the interest of the first country. In any event, one cannot provide aid and then later claim that it's a loan and has to be paid back. Number 5, the price that Americans use to characterize what is owed them, $500 billion, is both too low and too high. It is far less than the value of the perpetual claim to Ukrainian resources that they are making right now. And it is far more than the United States has given Ukraine. The U.S. has committed over 3 years about $66 billion in humanitarian aid and about $119 billion in military aid. That second figure has to be examined a bit critically. Most of that money stayed in the United States, financing American factories in America and paying American workers. The rest of it was usually not money at all, but weapons, which were assigned a dollar amount for accounting purposes. Most of the weapons that were actually sent to Ukraine were obsolescing and would never have been used by the United States in a conflict. Instead, they would have been dismantled and thrown away at cost to the American taxpayer. Even if we take the American official price tag, we're looking at 185 billion, not 500 billion. And the true figure would probably be closer to a total 100 billion spread over 3 years. Number 6. It is important to keep these numbers in perspective. 185 billion or 100 billion is a lot of money. But over the course of 3 years of the longest war fought since 1945, it is not a huge sum. It is far less than the Ukrainians have paid themselves. It is far markedly less than the Europeans have granted to Ukraine, and they, of course, are not now demanding that it be paid back. It amounts to about a nickel on the Defense Department dollar. And it is, by far, the highest performing nickel on the Defense Department dollar. It is about a penny on the United States budget dollar. The cost to the United States of the Iraq War were at least 20 times higher. The amount of U.S. aid to Ukraine, a country of 40 million people fighting alone in the largest war since 1945, is less than half of the personal wealth of every single taxpayer, of a single U.S. taxpayer, Elon Musk. In fact, the increase to Musk's wealth since Trump was elected president 3 months ago is greater than all the American aid given to Ukraine over the last 3 years. Musk could personally pay an annual share of U.S. aid to Ukraine and still be the richest man in the world. As these various comparisons suggest, the United States is a huge economy with a huge governmental budget. We can be generous and make a decisive positive difference in world history at a cost that we do not even notice. Number 7, it was reasonable of the Biden administration and of Democrats and Republicans in Congress these last 3 years to believe that aid to Ukraine served American interests, no matter how narrowly these interests might be construed. No American soldiers have fought in a war of this scale against an enemy of this kind. Ukrainians have taught Americans a great deal about how modern warfare is fought, and Ukrainians have used American weapons systems to greater and different purposes than their original design. Rather than sitting on shelves in U.S. warehouses and then being thrown away, these weapons systems have undergone an audit on the battlefield, generating extremely valuable information for Americans. Ukrainians have also developed their own weapons systems, items that do not exist in the United States, but which in future, assuming a Ukrainian victory and an alliance with the United States would be shared, in even the narrowest military terms, the investment in Ukraine more than recouped its cost. Number 8, the security and economic gains for the United States from its investment in Ukraine, however, were far broader. Ukraine kept the conflict local, thereby preventing global economic instability and financial losses that would have been calculated greater than the sums discussed here. Ukrainian resistance to Russia, coming as it did at the end of the COVID era, was one of the preconditions for global economic recovery. The Ukrainians have essentially fulfilled the entire NATO mission, absorbing the force of the entire Russian army on their own, and sparing others, including the United States, the far greater costs of a larger war. By holding off Russia, the Ukrainians have also deterred Chinese aggression in the Pacific by demonstrating just how costly and difficult offensive operations can be. Until 2022, that was the most feared scenario for a global war, the cost of which in human and financial terms would have been orders of magnitude greater than U.S. aid to Ukraine. Should the United States continue its policy of weakening Ukraine and strengthening Russia, all of those costs, stupendously greater than the cost of aid to Ukraine, will have been paid by Americans. Number 9, it is morally grotesque during this war to put imagined American grievances first. The American taxpayer has helped Ukraine tremendously and has every reason to be proud. A very modest amount of aid has changed the history of the world. Americans have every right to be proud of the humanitarian aid that has allowed us to live and to rebuild. And be proud of their performance of their weapon systems and of the significant difference that they have made in this war. Ukrainians are grateful, and their officials always make public acknowledgments of the value of U.S. assistance. In Ukraine itself, civilians applaud when they catch sight of what they think is the United States system. But the cost for this for Americans has been only financial, and that cost has been recouped already 1,000 times in economic stability and national security. The costs of the war to Ukrainians, however, are of a completely different nature. They have lost tens of thousands of children kidnapped by Russia. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been injured. Tens of thousands have been killed. People under occupation suffer mass torture. Cities have been totally destroyed. And yet, at the same time, Ukrainians rebuild. And they fight as best they can against odds thought to be impossible. Ukrainians rebuild, and I have seen for myself in 5 trips to the country since the full-scale invasion began. They take responsibility during an impossible situation. For this, they deserve our respect and our support. Number 10, this whole business of, quote, costs, end quote, I fear, is a carefully designed information operation. It is a fact widely known and exploited that Donald Trump has a personal fear of being, quote, ripped off, end quote. This known vulnerability is visible when he speaks about Ukraine with a sense of personal grievance or with other high emotion. This weakness is, one must fear, exploited by Putin and others who wish to direct American policy. Unfortunately, in an oligarchical system in which emotions can have a decisive effect on policy, this approach has been very effective. It is possible that Trump has also been convinced, in some larger sense, the Ukraine is simply a vulnerable colonial territory that must be carved up, as in the redivision of a plot of property in a real estate transaction. The attempt to run the world in this way, though it may appeal to Mr. Trump's personal worldview, will lead to much less American power overall. Should it lead to Russian victory in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, this will be a moment of historical weakness, indelibly attached to Trump and others pursuing the current policy of wartime sadism against a loyal and important ally. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you tomorrow.